set?
All right, is Maya ready? All right, thank you. Thank you for coming out tonight and finding your way down here. Tonight we are excited to have Eric Peterson here. He is the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Waterworks Museum in Chestnut Hill. He also serves as chair of the Industrial Museum Professional Group of the New England Museum Association and is a co-founder of Industrial History New England. I want to thank the Historical Society for co-sponsoring this talk tonight. We are recording, so you'll be able to rewatch and share. It will be on the library's YouTube and Wayland, Waycam as well. And if you're joining us on Zoom and have a question, I should have asked, should people hold their questions till the end?
Actually, they can go anytime.
Anytime,
Sure.
okay. So if you're on Zoom and you have a question, just put it in the chat and I will raise my hand and read it out loud.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and good evening to everybody out in TV land. Thank you for coming here today and listening to my talk. It's really a pleasure to talk about something that touches all of us every single day, and that's obviously water. Not just the water we drink, but the systems that deliver it, the history behind them, and the communities they connect. So I am a museum director in Boston. Boston is really my forte. Scarlett had asked me to do this presentation, and so I've learned quite a bit about Wayland and its connection to Boston's system. So you'll forgive me if I don't get all my facts right, but I'm sure you will help me with that. And feel free to ask any questions along the way. Today, I want to share the story of Wayland's recent integration into the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority, or MWRA, and how this moment reflects a much deeper and older narrative, the evolution of Greater Boston's water infrastructure and the shift from local self-reliance to regional interdependence. I know this could be a potentially contentious subject here. I would assume that this topic has been something on the town's mind for some time. I just want to say I am not representing the MWRA here at all. I'm completely independent from them, so I'm not beholden, but I also respect very much what they do. I'm in Lexington, so we get our water from MWRA. I don't want them to cut me off. So, before there was a water system, well, for the first 2 centuries of their existence, settlers on the Shawmut Peninsula and at the Sudbury Plantation had to find their own drinking water the best they could. I thought these 2 slides were kind of interesting because they sort of, at least the roadways, look somewhat similar. There's a few in Boston, than on the Sudbury Common. But essentially, life is about the same back in, we call this the 17th century. Fortunately, Boston had a great spring, or else it would actually have never been settled. The Shawmut Peninsula would have never been settled otherwise. That great spring was eventually moved down to closer to the water. You can see in the distance here a ship. This is supposedly, this is actually an image that was done quite a bit later, but this is supposedly how that spring actually looked once it was brought downhill down to the water line, which is now much filled in, so this area would not be the same as it was in this image. But you can still see that the settlers there are accessing water, the Great Spring, under that big door. Doesn't look too convenient to get to. But they're needing that water, certainly not only for drinking, but also for putting out fires. Of course, at that time, everybody cooked inside, and there were wooden buildings, and fires were just a constant nightmare for everybody. You had to have some way to try to put that out. So water was had a dual function, certainly there. And the Sudburys, East Sudbury and Sudbury, had abundant local water supplies, including ponds and the Sudbury River. And in this image You can see a water row where most of the very earliest settlements or houses were. And I'm not sure, are they still there today? Is that some are still there? Yeah. It certainly looks convenient to the Sudbury River, and there's obvious water sources in all directions. So this gave me a clue that there must be a lot of water out in the Sudbury area. So we're here, we have the Great Spring down in Boston, a local water supply that people can access when they want, and life is relatively similar at that time. But as Boston grew, the Great Spring, accessed by wells in numerous locations, and the impact of houses and cesspits, graveyards, and chicken coops rendered the water increasingly undrinkable. Citizens were really challenged to find sources of drinking water. And in this image, we do see a number of sources. One of certainly is getting rain. Once that Great Spring became polluted, you really were lucky if you could find a well that did access that water that wasn't foul and disgusting. You could buy water off a cart, and in some areas there were places where the town supplied water. This is the original first town well here at this point. But water was a precious commodity, certainly at that time, and became increasingly difficult to get to. Also, the water from the Great Spring had now become very mineralized, and so you could not wash your clothes very well. You could not make suds. How annoying that would be to try to wash your clothes and you would not get any suds. Now, you could make the long trip out into the hinterlands and get water that way, but if you were a urban dweller, that would be pretty difficult. So the extreme difficulty of finding good water in Boston inspired the creation of, whoops, it didn't barely fit on there, the creation of one of the nation's first corporations, the Jamaica Pond Aqueduct Company. This was a scheme in which, because people had no alternatives, it offered them access to water through a 3-mile-long wooden aqueduct, taking water downhill from Jamaica Pond into Boston. You had to pay for this, and really only the wealthy could pay for this. Really, at its height, it had less than 1,000 people involved in this water system. It did continue providing water well into the 19th century, but on a very limited basis. Really, this was sort of a stopgap in the late 18th century, and again, only for those people that could afford it. By the way, these wooden waterlogged systems were very typical of that time, not just in Boston, but all over the place. And we have, if you've come to the Metropolitan Waterworks Museum, you can see we have many samples of these objects that we get more than we can, we have way too many, because what else do you do with a wooden waterlog? Would bring it over to the Waterworks Museum. This is what that might look like. This is one being excavated. I'm not sure exactly where, but you can see the typical way it is. Long pieces of wood, and then at the end they're sculpted and then connected to one another. The piece that's sticking up is actually an access point for if you should need to get water during a fire. That's called a fire plug, one of the very earliest fire response methods. So these things do still come out of the ground, usually not in this length, much more like what you see above that with smaller chunks, which is what we have. And when you look at those logs, you wonder, could anybody possibly want to drink water through them? And actually, I think they were willing to do that as opposed to drink from the Great Spring, which by this time had become so heavily disgusted that you really could not drink the water from it. Yes?
Yeah, so the water that came through, there's always a head of water to pressurize it. So this was pressurized water in some sense?
Very limited pressure, because it's just downhill. It's just gravity that's providing that. And that, the Jamaica Pond is a kettle pond. So it's it fluctuates during the seasons. So in the summertime, it's going to be a lot less of a flow. Then you have problems with it freezing in the wintertime. And you do have that sort of oaky taste that you would get from a typical kettle pond. But the water was definitely drinkable. And this was a useful system for those wealthy folks, especially because you could have the Jamaica Pond Aqueduct Company bring it right next to your house. This is way before indoor plumbing, but it would allow you to then to have your people get to it much easier, which is something that really wouldn't happen these days. Well, these days you wouldn't get a water supply anyway. But at that point, it was sort of informal system. As long as you had the money to pay, that company would do whatever you like. So they made some money off of this. This wasn't a tremendously profitable system, but it really highlights the idea that there was a lot of desperation in Boston at the time. Population had grown, and that one single spring now was just completely overwhelmed. So let's see where that, oh yes, okay. Because only a few citizens, 100 citizens, could afford this luxury, this became a very difficult process to get water, and the city really wasn't doing anything about it. In fact, that aqueduct company was formed, and that system was available at about 1795, which is really a long time between then and water being brought to the public in the 1840s. So essentially for decades, you had no option but to see how you could get water from some place. I imagine back then, if you were living in a household, that would be a constant concern. No wonder people had so many kids. You send them out and they go get water and bring it back, and probably do that all day long, because it really it was something you absolutely needed. And that water itself you probably needed to boil. This was a time when people really chose alcohol or anything else but drinking the water. So it was a problem that had to be fixed. And yet, Boston, in its wonderfulness, really delayed coming to any decisions about how to supply water for their city. And this is typical of the time, not just in Boston, but in many places. The unexpected growth of urban areas really led to a confusion, and it led also to a lot of opportunities to sort of argue about where to get water from, how to get it, what kind of water can you drink. And sometimes people thought you could drink out of the Charles River, which at that time was brackish. So nobody would really want to drink salty water. But those ideas were all floated out there. And in amongst the whole process, there were those that thought, well, if we get a public water system, we'll have to pay more taxes. I mean, it was advertised as being free, but what did that mean? I mean, eventually we'll be charged. Other people thought, well, there's so many immigrants here, they shouldn't have free water. They should somehow be providing water. Or, you know, why is it they can get that when we've been living here all these years? Of course, everybody was an immigrant back then, but there was that kind of attitude. And the wealthy people really fought against the idea of having this because they had access to other options, whether that was a private water system or they had the servants that you needed to go and bring the water. So it became very onerous for the average person in Boston to get water, and then at that point, by the 1840s, they were not happy about it. I don't know if they were actually fighting, but they certainly were demanding something be done. And again, Boston dragged its feet, couldn't decide, didn't know how much to spend, where do you get that water from? All those questions really delayed everything. So as this grumbling got louder and louder, the legislatures in Boston finally agreed that this was a critical issue that they had to do something about, but they continued to dither over proposed locations and all the objections from people that thought this might harm the city, which is kind of hard to believe. But finally, in the 1840s, they came up with a plan. The plan was to go out to East Sudbury, or as it was called, Wayland. This was where they determined the water supply should come from. And it was at Long Pond at that time. It made a lot of sense because the topography was perfect for it to flow by gravity down into the city of Boston. Perfect, but not easy. Obviously, 14 miles of a underground aqueduct system was a serious engineering effort. And they spent a bunch of time figuring out how to do it. Ultimately, they decided that they would raise the level of Long Pond by damming its southwestern outlet in what is now Framingham, near the Wayland's border. This raised the water supply and made it much more an option in terms of large-scale, reliable, and drinkable, most importantly. So this would require the construction of nearly a 15-mile-long underground brick-and-mortar aqueduct that terminated at the Brookline Reservoir. So this is what that plan ended up looking like ultimately. See on the left is Long Pond, still called Long Pond at that point, before the system was completed. And you see the aqueduct snaking around and ultimately depositing water to a bunch of different reservoirs downtown in Boston. You can see also here, this is the location of Jamaica Pond, where that original wooden waterlogged aqueduct was, and how close that was to Boston. This one was something much larger, a real public water supply for the city. Okay. As soon as that water got down into Brookline, from there it went into Boston with new cast iron pipes. So this was an ultra-modern system, really high-end engineering in 1848 when it was completed. Some of the very first cast iron pipes used in the metropolitan area, and it worked great. I mean, it did actually work. So along the way, not only were ultra-modern engineering techniques employed, but an effort was made to embellish this aqueduct system with architectural elements that reflected Boston's growing prestige as a city of great sophistication. So you'll notice here, obviously, the gatehouse is quite beautiful. If you've been down to the Chestnut Hill Reservoir, there's a number of other gatehouses there. All of them have a different kind of architecture, but all of it reflects Boston's conviction that it was needing to prove to everybody how sophisticated it was. You may know at that time Boston called itself the Athens of America. So they really had a serious goal in mind, and they put that into architecture in a way that everyone could see how sophisticated they were. It's interesting, though, these buildings are all slightly architecturally different. Public taste, architectural taste really changed very, very quickly. You can see that especially down at the Chestnut Hill Reservoir, where you have gatehouses that are fairly close together, separated maybe by decades only, but the style is completely different. Again, this reflects this ability of Boston to come up with any architecture they thought would be beautiful, and they put the money into it, and again, hoping that the world would notice how sophisticated the city was. So,
Got a comment on the last slide. I'm interested in water in Wayland, and amongst that, I do a lot of fishing. And that shoreline, we go down quite a bit. And I have on my boat, sonar that measures the depth. And it so happens that area is one of the areas where the water is deepest, closest to the shore, whereas above and below, there's quite a shoal.
how deep is that? How deep?
Over 20, 30 feet.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Contiguate is 50, 60 feet.
Right, right.
Out in the middle. These are also glacial kettles. But down just north of that is the town beach, and that goes out quite a ways, whereas by that wall it's quite deep.
And are you successful catching fish there?
Well, they stock it with trout.
Oh.
Put my boat out in the spring to.
Yeah, they're this big, right? No, wait, this big.
Well, very good fish in Cochituate.
Oh, good, good, excellent.
But it's the deepest right there, closest to the shore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would make sense, I think, because that's the, isn't that the outflow?
Intake.
Or the intake, okay, so yeah, you'd probably want it to be low.
That's the same gatehouse, is it not?
Yes, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, well, that's where they take the water out. Yeah.
So here's the scenes of the completed sections of that Cochituate aqueduct. You can see what it looked like inside. Often they had to deal with rock, solid rock. They would it's an oval shape. You can actually ride a boat down inside there. That was done during there were a couple of incidents where we know that rides were given to people, especially in the water department. But we also have a really interesting anecdote about a school group of young women that went into, this was before the water was put into the aqueduct, but they were allowed to tour the inside of the aqueduct, which they thought was terrifying and also very drippy and dark. But you could actually take a boat there I'm trying to remember where you would access it. Ultimately, you end up, I guess, at the Chestnut Hill Reservoir at some point. Yeah, I'm not sure. In any case, this is the terminus, a giant above-ground reservoir. This was right adjacent to the State House. In fact, when the State House was built, that entire structure had to be removed. It's a little of a hairy thing because it was above ground, lead lined. You could actually drive a wagon underneath it, but it was leaky and drippy down underneath there. But the idea here was that Boston wanted to show everybody that look at what we have done. This is incredible feats, very expensive, and we are now supplying the entire city of Boston with water. This is actually the second water system, only after Philadelphia's water system in the country. So very, very early, super advanced, and it had its issues. Ultimately, this was demolished in the turn of the century, I think, about maybe 1890s or so. So the completion of this aqueduct, as you might imagine, was greeted with enormous fanfare. Here we have the day of the celebration, October 25th, 1848. 100,000 people gathered on the Frog Pond to see water shooting up in the air. This was a big deal. I mean, not just for citizens. There were only about 50,000 people that lived in Boston at the time, but it was for the entire region, a metropolitan water system that actually was free and had good, clean drinking water. An amazing thing. And during that celebration, which went on for a week, there were parades and all kinds of odes written, and every celebrate, guns fired and people singing. There were songs written, all kinds of things. What's really interesting is a lot of these people here are actually real individuals. I do not know the name of this Chinese guy, but this guy was a very famous fixture in the 1840s in Boston, and so they were put into this image just to underscore the fact that everybody was there for this event. This was the time when Long Pond was renamed Lake Cochituate. This was reflecting a desire for a more appealing Native American-inspired name, Cochituate meaning falling water or swift river in Algonquin. I guess we haven't changed it back to Long Pond yet, but anyway. Yeah.
So that's one of three stories I've heard about where the name came from. Another is that the mayor of Boston made it up out of whole cloth. And the one in the middle is that it appeared on an old map from 200 years prior for the area around the outlet to what we call now Cochituate Brook.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the place name for that Yeah, I've heard the story about the word in.
Yeah, well, it's interesting why they would really want to emphasize the fact that it had a Native American, reference, as opposed to, I guess Long Pond is kind of boring. There probably are thousands of long ponds in Massachusetts. Yeah.
Yeah, not to interject much, but I just finished reading a biography of Donald McKay, who built the famous clipper ships
Oh, yeah.
in East Boston.
Oh, sure.
And it was noted around that time that the Christian, one of the famous ships, they used, quote, constituent water.
Sure. Yes. I mean, there was such a sense of pride of that, I think. Well, certainly if you had practically a century of undrinkable water, that anything you got, especially if it sounded very sexy like that, would have been wonderful, a wonderful thing. We're drinking pure constituent water. It actually sounds pretty good. Pretty good. So,
Drink pond water. I think that's the impetus.
that's probably right.
Lake.
Yes, that's right. It's not from Long Pond. It's from a better place.
When I was a kid, one of the beer companies used to say, brewed by the
Shores of Lake
waters
Cochituate.
of Lake Cochituate.
Yeah, that's funny.
And that's, 50s.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, well, we don't, we should probably keep saying that. Yeah. Yep, right. That's right. Wachusett also. I think that there must be a story behind that, or a much bigger story in terms of referencing Native Americans, and I'm sure it wasn't in a super positive way. It's probably more of a way to connect us to purity or the origin or that kind of thing. I would assume that. Yeah, naturalness, right. Yeah, so it's not just some average name, it's for real. So, let's see what's next here. Oh, this is my own little slide that probably get me in trouble with the MWRA, but so you might be wondering, how was Boston able to appropriate Long Pond, which was far outside the city limits of Boston? How were they able to take that as their water supply? The answer is through a combination of legislative action, negotiations, and property acquisitions led by city officials and water commissioners, and probably a lot of lawyers as well. So I put the lawyer's foot there. And this was sort of a thing that, this was the beginning of a repetition of that. Essentially, local legal and political challenges were overridden by the wealth and savvy of city administrators. This was the beginning pattern that would continue well into the 20th century, when eminent domain was often cited for land acquisition, particularly for large water projects like the building of the Wachusett or the Quabbin reservoirs. So this started here and it didn't end for the next 100 years. This sense of entitlement and the dominance of the urban elite over those that lived in the countryside. I find that's really the crux of this whole story. That still has yet to be explained, in the sense that how is that morally right? And I mean, it's pretty easy to see how they got away with that. Certainly they had the wherewithal to insist that they were taking Long Pond, and they also were going to tear up whatever land was necessary to get that back into Boston. And they did that, and even till today, this 60-mile swath of land all the way out to the Quabbin Reservoir is Boston property, which is, when we have tours at the Waterworks Museum, it's nearly impossible to explain how that happened to be, how that continues to be, that dominant sense of the city capital spreading all the way out through the entire state. I mean, much of it obviously was population and a wealth disparity, but still, somebody must have felt either bad about it, and I know people felt upset about it.
I think there's here the battle the Sudbury farmers had with the Bill mill owners over the dam in Billerica,
Mhm.
which pitted the industrial interests and the modernity of the manufacturers on, in the canals area
Sure.
in Lowell against the rural farmers
Right.
here in Sudbury.
Yes.
And we were Wayland as well by that point.
Yes.
And the not only legal battles, it went to the legislature several times, and corruption was clearly evident
Yes.
in the whole process. But yeah, it was this attitude of the modern urban interests are just more important than the
Right, and overriding. Yes, exactly right. It's interesting. I mean, I know this happened not just in Massachusetts, but in many other places, kind of a typical pattern. I wonder if that's still the same today. Yes?
Just two things real quickly. When they did create Quabbin and all that kind of thing, did they offer water to the towns they went through? I mean, that could have been part of the bargain.
I'll get to that. I'm
We're
going to get to that.
take your water, but we're going to provide you with purified water or something.
You'd think that would be the case. Well, we'll get to that in a second. Eminent domain is really justified by the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution that requires parking be for a public use, and it mandates payment of just compensation to the owners. So those are in quotes, of course, because what public uses and what just compensation are really depending on who's winning the legal battles. And in the end, it was obviously the more dominant urban or industrial elites that were really making that happen. So the damming of Lake Cochituate had mixed consequences for the town of East Wayland, which eventually in 1835 was renamed to Wayland. Obviously, the negative consequences were the flooding of meadows and agricultural land that hurt some local farmers and certainly changed traditional land use. And also, it imposed the city and state authority over local water authorities. This was the pattern, control over its natural environment. On the positive side, putting Long Pond into the regional water supply connected Wayland to a critical metropolitan infrastructure, which elevated its importance in the region. Connected, sort of. The development of a water infrastructure attracted more attention and resources for public works and environmental management in the area, and could contribute over time to its growth and municipal services. Potentially. This sounds like an argument that somebody made that's probably wearing a nice shoe and with nice pinstripe pants. This is all good for you people, and you're going to get something out of it, and you'll be noticed and whatnot. So Wayland was not offered access to Boston's Cochituate Aqueduct water system when it was completed in 1848. From Boston's perspective, their focus was obviously on the urban water demand, and they believed that rural towns along the aqueduct route, especially Wayland, had plenty of water to meet the needs of small farming communities. The real need was in Boston as it was exploding with population. It appears to me that Wayland, for its part, was not really interested in being part of this metropolitan water infrastructure. They were more concerned about local water rights, and they also had fears about taxation and regulation if it came to connecting with Boston's water system. So they were happy with what they had, not particularly happy with being dominated by the big city. I find this image really compelling here, and there's a couple more that we'll see. There's that sense of, just in this photograph, that sense of life in Wayland as independent, self-reliant. This is a early picture from somewhere in 1870 or so, but it just looks like life is good, and we don't need to be urbanized, or we don't need all these fancy, expensive things, because we're doing just fine, thank you very much. So by 1870, Boston's water needs had really outstripped the capacity of the Cochituate Reservoir. So that's about 20 years later. And here you can see this image of Boston. Boston was growing incredibly fast. 250,000 people spread out over a vast area. You can see in this image there's even the Boston Common, obviously all kinds of ship traffic. I mean, this was now a thriving port city, possibly the Athens of America by this time, although it's not yet completed. And by comparison, there's Wayland, quiet, somewhat empty, with a population of about 1,200 people in 1870. So just that dominance you can see right there. It's not carrying over to the pastoral landscape. So as Boston grew, by 1870, it needed more water. And so the Sudbury Aqueduct was constructed between 1875 and 1878, roughly 16 miles from the Sudbury River watershed in Framingham, through a number of towns, including Sherborne, Natick, Wellesley, Needham, Newton. It went all that way before it reached Boston's Chestnut Hill Reservoir, which was also completed in 1870. This was a distribution reservoir. The reason for this was because that original Cochituate Aqueduct failed briefly, not that far after it was constructed. It was a brick and mortar failure. It shut the city off from its water supply for a few days, but they were able to repair it. But everyone was kind of shaken by that idea because at that time you couldn't go from Boston to Long Pond and get your water if this had happened again. So there was a demand to rethink this system pretty soon after it was in. This is a typical pattern here as we're trying to catch up with urban growth. And infrastructure projects here are always falling short of this enormous influx of people and the needs that they have. So again, another plug for the Waterworks Museum. You really see how important infrastructure is and how you have to really adjust on the fly. A lot of people probably sat around desks saying, oh, the city won't grow that big. And then ultimately, when you put the projects in and they're pressured immediately, those guys get fired, I would think. So Chestnut Hill Reservoir built in 1870. In this image is a little bit later. This is probably turn of the century, 1900 or so. What you see in this image is the Chestnut Hill High Service Pumping Station on the right and the Chestnut Hill Low Service Pumping Station on the left. Both of them connected to this distribution reservoir. Water is still coming in from Lake Cochituate. Now it's also coming in from the Sudbury River, and eventually even other aqueducts would be added onto the system. Both of these structures housed massive pumps that took that water and pushed it into Boston. In the case of the Chestnut Hill Reservoir, the water there was pumped to that higher elevation behind it, where there was another reservoir, that's Fisher Hill. That reservoir fed all the higher elevations of Boston. This was an incredibly important project for Boston because as the lower elevations became quickly populated, the higher elevations are where all the immigrants came and lived, and there was being developed very, very quickly. So water needed to go up to them. Originally this reservoir was entirely fed by gravity, so you need to have some way to pump water to where you need it. So it's much more advanced. But anyway, I throw that in there just because I really love the image of that. That building is almost exactly the same as it was way back then. Both of them now are missing their smokestacks, but otherwise the structures are entirely intact. So yes, Boston was the primary beneficiary of the Sudbury Aqueduct's infrastructure, but it did, at this point, they were allowing people to connect to that system, or these various towns along the way. What this was the beginning of a bold vision of a regional water system. Prior to 1870, the idea was sort of piecemeal, but by 1870 and after, it became clear that you could connect up a vast area to these various aqueducts and reservoirs. And so the whole issue becomes much bigger. It's not necessarily a local issue now, it becomes a regional issue. Beneficial and harmful in some ways. Again, let's go back here. Inside the building, this is my little plug time. So this is the Chestnut Hill High Service Pumping Station. I don't know if you've ever been there. I know some of you have. I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful building on the outside. This is a H.H. Richardson design. This is Richardsonian Romanesque. It's actually built by the city architect after Richardson, who was Arthur Vinyl, but using the stylistic aspects that Richardson invented. Looks like a chateau. And if it didn't have a smokestack, you wouldn't really know that it wasn't. But inside are intact, massive steam engines. This was Boston's enormous pride. Once again, they invested in this very high-tech equipment to pump, eventually, past the turn of the century, something like 60 or 80 million gallons of water a day out of that station alone. So it kind of gives you an idea of how big the city had grown and how quickly. So that's the plug for that. Wayland continues to be self-sufficient, an agrarian town, relying on its local wells and aquifers to meet its water needs. This is a wonderful slide of the Sudbury River, and you really get that sense of the pastoral life is still continuing. Meanwhile, in Boston, you have these big machines. You have a lot of coal usage now, certainly industrial-wise. You have trains. So Boston has become a completely different place. It's no longer, far past its agrarian roots. Now it's a modern city, relatively modern city, struggling to meet the needs of many different kinds of citizens, whereas out in the hinterlands, life continues in kind of a nice way. I wonder if there was a sense that Boston had overdeveloped itself, but I believe that they felt that progress really was the dominant thing, and therefore progress meaning huge billowing smokestacks, trains roaring by, and sometimes people getting run over. This is just the consequences of progress, I think.
Do we know where that photo was taken?
No, this is a postcard. So, yes.
It's probably the canal bridge. I'm not positive. Where is that? Well, it no longer exists, but the original crossing over the river, what's that?
West of Old Town Bridge.
Yes. The original crossing over the river was where the Wayland Country Club is now, the Old Town Bridge. And that went over a causeway, and then where the main flow of the river is now, next to the Route 27 bridge, was the canal bridge. So it linked the end of...
It's unclear to me that could be the Old Town Bridge, but there is a present day, there's still an aqueduct over the Sudbury up above what's called Stones Bridge. I wonder if that area, you don't think so? No. Okay, it's called, but in that case,
It might be Pelham Island Bridge, an earlier version than the one from 1925.
It's only one arch, the other ones are 3 and 4 arches.
Yeah, there are three arches on that bridge at least.
See to the left? I think it continues over. I think it's more than possible, but I'm not seeing.
It's a beautiful postcard in any case. So, as I was mentioning, Wayland is continuing to be self-sufficient, relying on itself and its abundance. Certainly water needs were met. But at the turn of the century, the landscape is reshaped once again by the thirst for water. But this time it would not be just for Boston, but the need for a reliable and safe water source for dozens of surrounding communities.
Can I add one more thing about the
Sure.
Sudbury Aqueduct? The Chestnut Aqueduct was gone in the 1950s, but the Sudbury Aqueduct remains and is functional.
That's right.
And was actually used in 2010.
Yep.
If you remember, a pipe broke at about Route 128. All of Boston lost its water supply. But the bypass was to reactivate that old Sudbury aqueduct.
Yep.
And it kept Boston alive, at least for firefighting, for, I think, 3 days.
Right, right. Yeah, we were under boil water effect. I was actually working at the museum at that time, and it was an incredible thing to see that being utilized. I couldn't believe that they were saying that that water was coming through the Sudbury aqueduct, 100 years old, and it still works. It still works till today. That reservoir, the Chestnut Hill Reservoir, is still a functional reservoir. It's a emergency storage reservoir, but they maintain it just as if it was to be used every single day. In fact, last week or a couple of weeks ago, they were just working on the underground pumping system for emergencies that's built right next to the high service and low service pumping station, because they maintain and make sure that in the event that happens again, God forbid, that they'll be able to handle that. I was amazed that they were quickly moved into action and were able to shift over. It certainly had to be the kind of nightmare if you work for the MWRA that you had been hoping would never happen. But I think that's part of being a water utility, or any kind of utility, is you always have to have some kind of plan B or multiple plan Bs and C and D, right, exactly right. So, and thankfully they did. So it was amazing to see that. So another shot of Wayland again, resolute in its independence. I like this view also, nice stone wall there. But the landscape is going to be tore up all again. Oh, this is another pretty shot. I'm not sure why I put that in there. As Boston and neighboring municipalities develop larger and more complex water systems, including the Weston Aqueduct, regional infrastructure grew, reflecting metropolitan water demand and technological advances. However, Wayland continued to resist joining the water system, preferring local control and self-reliance over interdependence. So this Weston Aqueduct was a big deal, coming back through Wayland as the aqueduct had for the Cochituate system. In this case now it's much more advanced. We're using pipes, massive cast iron pipes, and enormous engineering efforts, a lot of it still by hand, as you can see, or horse drawn, and incredible construction efforts that really were cutting edge at the time. This had to be somewhat dismaying. Again, I don't quite understand where Wayland stood in this project. I assume that any areas that were disturbed when this went underground were compensated in some way. But it had to be kind of uncomfortable feeling to feel that, once again, Boston and now other communities are sort of dominating and saying, well, this is what we need, and we're doing it in your backyard. Yet another shot there, just incredible. These are all images from the glass plate image collection that the water department took of every single construction project they did from the 1880s all the way until well into the turn of the century. It's an enormous wealth of information here, not just a lot of pipe shots, and this is all accessible, publicly accessible on Digital Commonwealth, but in the background of these shots you can see enormous detail. You can zoom in, and it's been very helpful for us at the Waterworks Museum to have this. For one thing, we don't have to maintain it. It's accessible for everybody. We don't have to take care of these very delicate silver gelatin slide glass negatives. But we're able to use this to really see how people lived, how they dressed, how they did their jobs, what race the people were, or to some degree. So all these clues come out from these, what would have been mundane construction images. But now it becomes a wealth of information. So let's see. So the Weston Aqueduct delivered 118 million gallons of water a day to the city of Boston. once that Wachusett Reservoir and Dam project was completed in 1905. That itself is an amazing project. I don't know if anybody here has been to that. Obviously, you probably have. I mean, it's one of the most amazing civil engineering projects, certainly of its time. I think second only to the Panama Canal in terms of scale and complexity. And we know that many of the engineers that worked on the Panama Canal also worked on the Wachusett project. So I highly recommend going out there if you get the opportunity, because it's a mind-blowing thing to see what was done really almost 100 years ago.
And where is that exactly?
In Wachusett.
What's the
It's
name of the?
Clinton, Mass. Yeah, and you can go there. There are days where you can actually go and walk on the dam. They open it up to the public, and even if you don't walk on the dam, all around that area is just absolutely beautiful and big. I mean, big. Yep.
So this is Wayland.
Yep.
It looks like the slope next to the high school. Do you know where this?
I do not. When they label these, they do it in sectors. So you'd have to have sort of the original mapping to see that.
I think this is probably one side of the Cochituate siphon, which is the pipe that runs under Old Connecticut Path near the high school. The reason the Western Aqueduct is mostly gravity stone arch covered like the Cochituate Aqueduct, but there are two spots where there was a valley it had to traverse.
Yep.
And either you have to act like the Romans and build, huge high aqueduct structures, or you use the modern technology of pipes, cast iron pipes, and make siphons, which only means a sealed pipe from the high point over here to the high point over there. And if you're on Old Con Path near the high school, you look up the hill one way, there's a gatehouse. You look up the other way, there's another gatehouse, and those are the ends of this pipe that runs under Old Con Path and up over it. So I don't know which side it's probably the eastern side. I don't really know, but it's one side or the other of that.
Thanks for that.
We live,
Yeah,
we live at the west, I mean, it's behind our house, the Western
Yeah.
Aqueduct.
So it's
Yeah.
part of your backyard then.
Yeah,
essentially.
it is, yes.
But one question I have, and I don't know if you've run into this at all. Reading the old construction accounts of the Western Aqueduct, there's a mention of a drain at the bottom of the Happy Hollow siphon is what this.
Yeah.
And the drain runs off into the marshes of the river somewhere, and I've never been able to figure out where exactly.
Is that draining off from this supply line, or?
Yeah, apparently, as far as I could understand it, it was a way to drain the pipe.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. In the event of maintenance or something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense, because water would be stuck if you couldn't do that. So yeah, you need to be able to get to it. Huh. Interesting.
But I am really curious about where the end of that drain went, and I've never figured.
That sounds like we got to find it and then go in it. Yeah, go ahead.
Back on that several years ago, I do a lot of fishing. I was on the Sudbury River, and in the summer it's very low, and I was astounded that there was a very swift current. And I caught a bunch of fish, but I later learned that they'd been flushing the pipes.
Oh.
That's why the Sudbury in the middle of summer, which is normally very low.
Sure. Yeah.
I've never seen it since, but it was an interesting experience.
Was it salmon from Wachusett? Or no.
Long gone.
So, despite the enormous and effort and expense, and this is now the same story as I've been saying, put into these reservoirs and aqueducts and went right through Wayland.
That's her house.
Is that right? Wow. Fantastic. What a beautiful image that is. I mean, I love it.
Is that a cutting as well? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where that came from.
It's 1874, so it wouldn't be cutting because he was born in 1860, I think.
Does it look the same?
That looks like something that Lorenzo Lovell could have had professionally taken or something. I didn't realize it was done by cutting.
No, it isn't though.
It isn't a cutting picture.
No, he was only 14.
But Lorenzo took a picture of this, and then about the same time, the market next door. So we have pictures of both.
So despite this going right through Wayland, there really was very little interest other than hoping the infrastructure would not blemish the pastoral homeland. So we fast forward then to today. So I'm running out of time here. In 2021, as you probably all well know, Wayland discovered PFAS contamination in its water supply. These forever chemicals pose a serious health risk and really are difficult and expensive to remove. Last year, Wayland joined the MWRA system. In April of this year, a permanent connection was finally made to the MWRA system, part of a $38 million plan that includes the construction of a new PFAS removal plant at the Happy Hollow well field. It's hoped that Wayland can eventually be able to again rely on its own water supply, but it has options should they need to go to the MWRA system or not. So I'll finish up here. Wayland's story of resisting integration into the regional MWRA water system until recently is very similar to that of many other towns in Greater Boston and the Metro West region. Historically, numerous towns prioritize local control over their water sources to maintain self-sufficiency and to avoid costs associated with a regional infrastructure, be able to manage their own water in their own backyard. Many towns initially relied on private wells, small reservoirs, local aqueducts, and they resisted this metropolitan dominance. But over time, as population increased, urbanization, industrialization happened, and new environmental regulations made local water systems inadequate or vulnerable. Contamination such as PFAS in local wells and an aging infrastructure and the need for treated, reliable supply pushed many towns towards the interconnection with a larger regional system like the MWRA. So in sum, Wayland's integration into the MWRA system reflects a broader historical arc from rural self-reliance to regional interdependence. Yay! Echoing Greater Boston's evolving water infrastructure since the 19th century. So this is all things you probably all know, but for me it was fascinating to see this sort of push and pull between the urban and the rural, and to contemplate how that really continues, or maybe it doesn't, I'm not sure. Certainly this PFAS issue was something that brought that to mind, and the loss of self-reliance isn't an easy thing. I think interdependence there's benefits for everybody, but you also want your own ability to do what you want. So that push and pull, I think, still continues today. I think, though, I can highly recommend the water from the MWRA system. And I thank you for listening to me today. Please come to the Metropolitan Waterworks Museum. We're open 4 Wednesday through Sunday. We have free admission. And I also give tours, special access tours. If you want to go up on the machines and really get your industrial geek on, we can do that, or we can talk about water or any other number of things. So, and thank you again for allowing me to speak tonight. Thank you.